In the human experience, deep emotional depletion often arises after selfless attempts to help someone who not only expressed no desire to be saved, but also seemed intent on dragging their benefactor into their own abyss. This is the bitter price paid for betraying one's own needs and values to preserve a connection whose existence is possible only at the expense of one participant's inner peace and well-being. It is crucial to recognize that such a dynamic has nothing to do with true love. It is a manifestation of codependency. In psychology, this phenomenon is known as the savior archetype, which traps an individual in a vicious cycle where they give themselves selflessly but receive less and less in return. This cycle was deeply contemplated by Jung, who asserted that the unconscious holds the power to control human life. And sometimes, what unconsciously governs us takes the form of destructive relationships mistakenly perceived as romantic. The essence of the savior archetype lies in confusing genuine affection with an irresistible need to fix or save someone. Many people immersed in such relationships experience a tormenting sense of exhaustion, yet they remain even when an inner voice persistently urges them to leave. The reason for this paradoxical behavior lies not in love, but in the desire to save. These two concepts are fundamentally different. Behind this behavior lies a powerful, yet little understood force acting in the depths of the human psyche, rarely spoken about openly and clearly. This hidden force is the savior archetype, and understanding its mechanisms can shed light on many dark corners of interpersonal interactions. It is a psychological pattern, as alluring as it is destructive, that makes a person genuinely believe their life's purpose is to heal, save, transform, or perfect someone who clearly does not seek salvation. This powerful inner impulse originates not from unconditional love, but from a deeply hidden internal wound. And the cruelest truth is this: the less conscious and understood this primary pain is, the stronger an individual's conviction becomes that their love alone can achieve this desired transformation in another person. They continue to believe that if they show enough understanding, if they endure incredible trials, if they sacrifice just a little more, the object of their efforts will finally realize their mistake, change for the better, choose them, and begin to care for them. However, this never happens, because the core of the problem lies not in the other person, but solely within themselves. It lies in that inner child, who grew up with an unwavering belief that love must be earned, that one must always be good for it, give more than they receive, constantly postpone their own needs, and even absorb the pain of everyone around them, just so someone might finally notice and choose them. This is the true origin of the so-called savior archetype. It is not a virtue, as it may seem, but rather a sophisticated emotional survival strategy. And, as the eminent psychologist Carl Jung aptly remarked, everything a person does not acknowledge within themselves inevitably becomes their destiny. This means they are doomed to repeat the same story again and again, meeting different people but invariably arriving at the same painful ending. They break down and become exhausted, futilely trying to fix what rightfully doesn't belong to them. And the more they give of themselves in these endless attempts, the less remains of their own self. It is common to feel that one's love surpasses what is returned. How many times has one become a therapist, a parent, or an emotional pillar for someone who had neither the intention nor the capacity to offer reciprocal support? How many times have excuses been made for poor treatment, saying they had a difficult childhood or they just need time? The truth is, such a state of affairs stems not from pure compassion, but from a deep fear, the fear of letting go, the fear of being alone, the fear of feeling worthless if one is not useful in someone else's life. And this is the high price one pays for continuing to live within the savior archetype. They become a virtuoso at supporting others, yet completely alien to themselves. It is important that everyone takes these words to heart. Loving someone does not mean destroying yourself for them. It is not one's responsibility to heal wounds that another refuses to even look at. It is not their role to be a constant emotional support while being offered only meager crumbs of attention in return. And if every time one gives more they receive less, then it is not a relationship, but an unending sacrifice, merely skillfully disguised as a genuine connection. A particularly sorrowful aspect is that many women continue to remain in such unions, driven by the conviction that breaking up with a partner is an act of cruelty. However, true cruelty manifests differently. It lies in betraying oneself for the sake of preserving a connection with someone who makes no effort whatsoever to offer genuine love. When the eminent psychologist Carl Jung discussed the process of individuation, he implied the necessity of a decisive break with deeply ingrained, unconscious archetypes that define patterns of emotional attachments and ways of expressing love. Among these, the savior archetype stands out for its particular insidiousness. It instills in a person the false belief that they are doing something lofty and noble, while in reality it merely postpones the attainment of their own independence and true freedom. One does not become bad by deciding to let go. They do not act selfishly when they stop carrying a burden that does not belong to them. On the contrary, they demonstrate true courage, for refusing to try to save someone whose presence leads to self-destruction is one of the deepest and most radical expressions of self-love. One important fact must be clearly understood. If what one calls love brings more suffering than healing, then it is not true love. On the contrary, it is merely one trauma meeting another. It is one's own unhealed wound merging with another's and mistakenly calling this painful symbiosis destiny. A moment arrives that can be designated as the boundary separating past and future. When one stops taking on the role of savior, they suddenly realize a profound truth. There is no need to be someone special or perform feats to earn love. They do not need to heal others' wounds or carry someone else's darkness on their shoulders to feel their own worth. It is enough to simply turn inward and return to one's true essence. For if one does not acknowledge themselves, they will inevitably attract those who are also unable to appreciate them. And if they do not set clear personal boundaries, no one else will do it for them. If one does not choose themselves, then ultimately they will choose someone who came only to deplete them. 2. It is said that the human soul undergoes a kind of fragmentation every time one neglects the inner knowledge or intuition already present within them. Repeatedly, one has already realized that something was not right, that certain actions did not align with stated principles, that periods of silence seemed excessively cold, and absences were unacceptably prolonged. Yet the explanations given sounded too vague or evasive. Despite this, they continued to remain in such a situation. The reason for such behavior lies not in a lack of ability to see the truth, but in deeply rooted childhood beliefs. From a young age, they were taught that true attachment might be accompanied by suffering, that real love requires patience and justification of another's actions. It is then that a person takes on the role of a savior. The deepest cruelty inherent in this repeating pattern is that its origins lie not in the person who is currently the cause of someone's tears, brokenness, or deep confusion. Its beginning goes much further back in time. It originates at the very moment the individual was first made to feel that they were not good enough. From the moment they believed they had to do something to be loved, from the moment they came to believe they needed to earn the right to be seen. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung asserted that what remains unconscious manifests in life as inexorable fate. This is precisely what happens to a person. The individual repeatedly reproduces the same pattern because some part of them continues to hope for a different outcome this time. They believe that this time, the one who didn't see them before will finally look at them, that the one who didn't care will change their attitude this time, and so they stay, so they try to save the situation, so they betray themselves. However, they are not told that each such action comes with an extremely high price. Each time a person ignores their inner intuition, their connection with themselves weakens a little. Each time they find excuses for the inexcusable, the spark of their inner clarity gradually fades. Every time they give opportunities to someone who does not deserve them, they devalue themselves in the mirror. At first, they don't notice it because they act out of love, because they don't want to lose anything, because they don't want to abandon anyone, but in reality they are abandoning themselves. This unseen self-renunciation, this internal detachment from oneself, sometimes the most destructive of all, is because it is not obvious, remaining unnoticed by an outside observer, but is deeply felt by the person in rising anxiety, in a sense of worthlessness, in bottomless emotional exhaustion, and in the agonizing feeling of losing oneself without knowing how or when it happened. Allow me to state something that may cause pain, but is necessary to understand. People who truly love another will never undermine their self-confidence, resort to emotional manipulation, play with their time, disregard their personal boundaries, or exploit their past wounds. If someone forces you to feel that you must make excessive efforts, endure the unbearable, sacrifice beyond measure just for that person to stay, it is not true attachment. It is merely a mirror reflection of an internal, unhealed trauma. A trauma that seeks healing not by repeating familiar destructive scenarios, but by decisively breaking them. And to break this vicious cycle means daring to look into the eyes of that part of one's being that still naively believes in the possibility of fixing another person, even if they show no desire for change. To break it means to stop taking on the burden of others' suffering as if it were a personal responsibility. To break it means to come to a deep understanding that true attachment is not synonymous with salvation, and that one came into this life not to restore what someone else destroyed in their own soul. It is known that letting go of a connection can be agonizing, but it is far more agonizing to continue dissolving into another who is unable or unwilling to see the depth of your soul. And no, this is not a manifestation of selfishness, it is genuine self-love. And if one does not develop and cherish this love, no one else will do it for them. By this point it becomes clear, remaining in the old circumstances will bring no transformation. It doesn't matter how many attempts are made, how many resources are given, or how many explanations are offered. A person who does not wish to change will not change simply because someone bestows a stronger feeling upon them. For true change does not come from external sources. It is a conscious choice made from within. And if the other party does not make such a choice, there is no need to humiliate oneself to induce them to do so. Now that one has reached this important point, they are invited to ask themselves a brutally honest question: whom are they betraying more, this particular person or themselves? The body has already sent unequivocal signals, the heart has already endured numerous devastations, the soul has persistently cried out for a halt, manifesting through feelings of deep sadness, overwhelming emptiness, and rising anxiety. How much longer will one continue to ignore what has long been obvious? For one thing is known for certain: every time one neglects this inner voice, a fragment of their soul is destroyed, and no person is worth continuing to destroy oneself from within for. However, the journey does not end here. For when the decision is finally made to stop, when the courage is found to let go of the situation, when a decisive enough is uttered, then the most significant process begins. The process of reconstruction, returning to one's true essence, the rebirth of one's own identity. It is at this moment that a person's true strength manifests. 3. The savior archetype, when attachment becomes self-destruction. There is an insidious trap of the mind into which people often fall, and which the eminent thinker Carl Jung deeply explored in his works on archetypes. This is the savior archetype. It is important to note immediately that this is not about a noble hero who selflessly and out of healthy altruism extends a helping hand to others. We are talking about an entirely different inner image that is activated in a person when they are convinced that their sacred duty is to necessarily fix others, to heal those who cause them pain, or to save people sinking into despair, while they themselves are inexorably going under. When a person lives guided by this archetype, they inadvertently become a kind of emotional martyr. They begin to love not the reality of the current relationship, but only its potential, its possible future. Such a person remains in a relationship filled with suffering, not because they are unable to see the harm being done, but because they genuinely believe that enough love can transform absolutely everything. They exhaust themselves for others, selflessly giving all their strength, hoping that ultimately this complete self-sacrifice will bring them at least some reciprocal love or at least long-awaited approval. However, few realize that the roots of this archetype grow not from genuine unconditional love, but from a deep inner wound. This could be a wound inflicted by a sense of abandonment, the bitterness of rejection, a feeling of invisibility, or chronic inadequacy. It is this wound that makes a person believe that to be chosen by someone, they must first save that person, that only by being indispensable can they avoid being abandoned. And it is this dangerous illusion, this lie, that destructively consumes their entire life, depriving them of the possibility of true happiness. A person sometimes gives themselves completely. They find excuses for what they are forced to endure and feel deep guilt when the desire arises to set personal boundaries. Such behavior inevitably leads to a colossal imbalance. This is because they fill their existence with connections in which their contribution is 120%, while the partner barely provides the necessary minimum. They unconsciously attract people in deep crisis, those who do not seek healing but skillfully exploit their inner need to be needed. As a result, their emotional resources are depleted to such an extent that they lose the ability to recognize their own identity, separate from the suffering of another. Such a state of affairs cannot be called true love. Rather, it is a manifestation of unconscious power dynamics, a desire for control, and deep codependency. As Carl Gustav Jung asserted, every archetype has its shadow side. The shadow of the savior archetype manifests in its hidden desire to feel superior, for it is they, in their opinion, who possess knowledge, guide, and show boundless patience. However, behind this seeming power lies a deep, underlying fear. This is the fear of emptiness, the dread of loneliness, the apprehension of being utterly worthless if one fails to solve others' life problems. And this all-consuming fear, if not faced directly, mercilessly holds a person captive, not so much in specific relationships as in their own inner prison. Now, let everyone ask themselves with utmost, even brutal honesty, do they truly harbor genuine feelings for this person, or does true attachment lie in the sense of self-importance derived from managing someone else's chaos? Are they in this relationship out of genuine compassion, or are they simply unable to realize their own essence without the other's need for them? It is known that such reflections can cause deep pain, yet it is equally obvious that they are absolutely necessary. For if one does not recognize this hidden dynamic, they are doomed to constantly repeat the same destructive patterns. The individual will repeatedly attract the same type of people, those who do not seek genuine healing, but merely wish to be saved until they find another to take on that role. Ultimately, the person is left depleted, wondering why, despite all the effort invested, it was not enough. However, it is important to realize it is not about insufficient self-sacrifice or imperfection, but about the fact that energetic resources were directed towards someone who never wished to save themselves. And this circumstance is not the individual's fault. Nevertheless, their direct responsibility becomes exiting such a situation. When the decision is made to release this destructive archetype, something truly powerful happens. The woman stops perceiving herself as a savior and begins to see herself as a person worthy of reciprocity. She stops begging for love and begins to build her own inner value. The feeling of guilt for saying enough disappears, and instead genuine freedom is gained, allowing her to put herself first. The most beautiful thing is this. When one stops trying to save someone who came to destroy, the process of self-salvation begins, and it is here that true transformation takes root. This is not a superficial change, but a deep inner metamorphosis that reshapes the soul and reconnects it with its own worth. However, the journey does not end here, for something essential remains that requires reflection. The origins, the deep reasons why an individual repeatedly attracts and tolerates such destructive connections. To finally break this vicious cycle, these root causes must be understood. One should prepare for a deep dive into the very roots of the problem awaits. 4. Betrayal of the soul, when one renounces themselves to avoid another's rejection. This is one of the most imperceptible yet profoundly destructive acts an individual can commit against their own being. It refers to an internal renunciation of one's true self, undertaken with the sole purpose of avoiding rejection or abandonment by someone else. Such an exchange is invisible, but its cruelty is undeniable. In this process, a person enters into an unspoken internal agreement, which unequivocally proclaims, "I will remain silent about my true feelings, I will compromise on what I sincerely believe, I will forget my own worth, just so you stay." This is where the true betrayal occurs. It happens not when another person disappoints you, but when you yourself betray your principles and your essence. As Carl Jung aptly noted, what we stubbornly deny within ourselves ultimately gains power over our lives, acting from the shadow of the subconscious, and every time a person gives up a part of themselves out of fear of losing another, they effectively hand over the keys to their own inner integrity. Is this familiar to many? Has anyone ever felt compelled to play a role completely unsuited to them? Has one endured unacceptable relationships, demeaning remarks, or destructive dynamics that contradicted their dignity merely to maintain a semblance of peace? Have they felt a scream raging inside while outwardly displaying a smile? This has nothing to do with love. It is a manifestation of emotional dissociation. It is a state where one is physically present in a relationship but emotionally exiled from themselves. And what is worse, such behavior gradually transforms into a true addiction. This happens because every time an individual betrays their own principles and desires and the other person remains, the mind interprets such a situation as a confirmation of the chosen strategy's correctness. An illusion is created that it worked. A mistaken belief arises that emotional submission was the key that kept the connection unbroken. However, in reality, it was not love that held the connection, but only the sacrifice made. There is another aspect rarely warned about. The longer one continues to betray themselves, the harder it becomes to remember who they were before embarking on this path. They gradually lose their inner voice, lose their center, and stop trusting their intuition. The individual transforms into a pure reflection of what they believe the other desires to see in them, and each time they look in the mirror, they see someone who outwardly resembles them, but it is no longer themselves. Carl Gustav Jung asserted that individuation, this deep and multifaceted process of becoming one's true self, inevitably requires a direct confrontation with one's own shadow, and one of the most difficult shadows to acknowledge is that part of the personality that learned to build relationships based on fear, anxiety, silence, guilt, and constant sacrifice. This is the very part that became accustomed to literally walking on broken glass just to avoid disturbing the other, which learned that its presence is tolerable only if it is useful, convenient, and unconditionally subservient. A person, by their very nature, comes into this life not to exist as a truncated or limited version of themselves. They are not meant to be merely an emotional appendage of another individual, and certainly not to master the art of dissolving their own personality to maintain a fragile balance in a relationship. What happens when someone constantly betrays their own essence? The individual's soul gradually breaks, and this process is neither instantaneous nor dramatic. It proceeds through barely noticeable fissures that form every time one neglects their inner intuition, when they silence the truth, or when they agree to the unacceptable, all while maintaining a serene smile as if nothing has happened. And the most agonizing aspect of this entire situation is the arrival of a moment when one no longer knows how to find themselves again. They lose understanding of what they genuinely like, what thoughts truly belong to them. The boundaries of their own self blur, merging with the limits of the other. Existing for so long through the prism of others' expectations causes one's own inner voice to become a barely discernible whisper, almost inaudible. However, there is no fatal doom to live this way. The betrayal of the soul can certainly be reversed, and the first step on this path, though radical, is not overly complex. It lies in recognizing what is happening in acknowledging the fact of losing oneself, in stating that one has been simulating playing a role that does not correspond to their true essence, merely to gain affection. And, however painful it may be to admit, such affection is not justified if its price is the loss of one's authenticity. A turning point arrives when the individual begins to make entirely different decisions. At this pivotal point, the fear of losing another person gradually loses its former grip, yielding to the realization of a far deeper pain, the ongoing loss of oneself. The individual stops seeking permission to express their feelings, to say no, or to change their mind. It is then that understanding dawns. If someone can only remain in your life on the condition that you abandon your true essence, it is not love at all, but merely a form of dependency artfully disguised as a genuine connection. And, it should be noted, the human soul is perfectly aware of this. This is precisely why someone finds themselves here, why they have reached this threshold, for something within no longer wishes to play the old role, and the authenticity of one's own nature insistently knocks at the door. What follows will reveal how to begin opening this door from the inside, how to rediscover oneself after numerous self-sacrifices made for others. For despite the undeniable fact of this soul's betrayal, equally undeniable is the human capacity for healing. 5. Returning to self, how to break the cycle of self-betrayal and reclaim yourself from truth. There are no more excuses. If a person has reached this stage, it means that a part of them is no longer willing to give themselves away for meager crumbs. They are no longer willing to lay their heart on a platter for those who arrive only with knives. And what lies ahead may seem uncomfortable, but it brings true liberation. This is the path back to your true self. Carl Jung, the eminent thinker, asserted that true enlightenment is achieved not through visualizing bright images or striving for an ideal, but through a deep and honest acknowledgement of one's own darkness. It is on this path that many people encounter insurmountable difficulties, as their desire to heal is often coupled with an attempt to avoid directly facing their deepest wounds. They sincerely wish to return to their authentic essence, but try to bypass the agonizing process of moving through the pain of everything they once had to deny or suppress for survival. If an individual seeks to cease the act of self-betrayal, they must begin by understanding the root causes of such behavior in detail. This phenomenon, so common in human experience, is not a manifestation of weakness of character, intellectual inadequacy, or a lack of self-love. On the contrary, its roots most likely extend deep into childhood, when a person learned that being themselves was unsafe and fraught with negative consequences. Perhaps their emotional expressions were systematically ignored or invalidated, personal boundaries were ridiculed or violated, and the authentic self became a hostage to external approval. As a result, the individual grew up with a firm conviction that to maintain anyone's presence in their life or to gain acceptance, they had to constantly adapt to others' preferences. They were led to believe that they were too intense, overly sensitive, or excessively emotional, which required constant correction of their nature. Thus, the person gradually contracted internally, becoming an unparalleled master at guessing and satisfying others' needs, while completely losing the ability to recognize and satisfy their own. However, this learned role, this created image, no longer serves their true purposes, for the individual's true purpose is not to beg for recognition or to plead for a place in someone else's life. Instead, their path lies in building and fully living their own unique and unparalleled life. So where does this path of transformation begin? The answer lies in making simple yet profoundly uncomfortable decisions. You must learn to vocalize what you feel, even if your voice trembles with emotion. If you feel upset, it's important to state it immediately. If sadness overcomes you, you must declare it. If something causes you displeasure, you should say so directly. Your own voice serves as a faithful compass on this journey. Each time you speak your truth, even if it causes discomfort, you take a decisive step towards your authentic self. The next crucial step is mastering the ability to endure conflict. It's known that many have tried to avoid any rejection for so long that even the mere thought of saying no can cause intense anxiety. However, it is precisely this habit, absorbing discomfort to please others, that has led you to your current situation. This must stop. Conflict itself is not the enemy. The true adversary is the destructive silence that slowly but surely destroys from within. It is crucial to look at your relationships with ruthless honesty. You should ask yourself a key question. Who must disappear from my life if I decide to stop betraying myself? And under no circumstances should you ignore the answers that come. If for the sake of restoring your own integrity you have to lose someone, it means that such a relationship was never true love. Rather, it was a form of hidden but highly effective emotional manipulation. You must reconnect with your body. Inner betrayal is not limited to the realm of the mind. It is imprinted and stored in the physical form. Your throat remembers how many times you remained silent when you should have spoken. Your back holds the memory of how many others' burdens you unfairly took upon yourself. Your hands know how many times you strongly wanted to let go but lacked the courage. You should begin listening to yourself from here, from the depths of your own body. It is time to stop justifying what is inherently unjustifiable. Phrases like, "It's not that bad," "I'm probably just overreacting," or "everyone has their flaws," should be left in the past. Such statements only maintained an illusory perception of reality. The truth is this: if you constantly have to rationalize someone's behavior to maintain your presence in any situation or relationship, it is a sure sign that you are already betraying yourself. It should be noted that something you might rarely hear. To return to your true self, you do not need to possess a complete and clear understanding of everything that is happening. It is enough to make a decisive internal break, firmly deciding that life will no longer be built upon old wounds. You will no longer give your vital energy to those who can only consume it, and you will stop prolonging a story that only works if you cease to be yourself. Carl Jung, the distinguished thinker, spoke of the process of individuation as a return to who a person truly is. This path implies allowing the version of yourself that once seemed necessary to exist in order to be loved to die. This process undoubtedly includes experiencing grief, a sense of emptiness, and moments of loneliness when doubts arise about the correctness of the chosen path. However, it also grants freedom, inner peace, a sense of self-worth, and a deep connection with yourself that no one else can provide. 4. Within each person resides an indomitable force that has waited precisely for this moment. That part of the personality that was not sold, did not surrender, and never ceased to observe, even from the deepest depths, waiting to finally be acknowledged. And now, this moment has arrived. On this significant day, you stop betraying yourself. You stop trying to save someone whose presence was originally intended to cause harm and destruction. At this time, you realize that there is no need to be perfect or sufficient for anyone to earn love or acceptance. Today, the individual reclaims the most important position that exists, the one they hold in their own life. Conclusion. If you have reached this moment, it is not by chance. It is because something within you, that sacred voice that has long whispered that you deserve more, that you are destined for something great, no longer wishes to remain silent. On this day, you dare to face your own reality, and this, though it may not always seem so, is an act of incredible courage. For few actions require such immense bravery as breaking free from an established cycle that once provided a sense of security, but now subtly and steadily destroys you from within. Refusing to save someone who came to destroy is not an act of selfishness. On the contrary, it is a true act of self-love. It is a deep realization that you did not come into this world to serve as a balm for wounds that another fundamentally refuses to heal. You are not meant to heal the pain of those who only know how to inflict suffering. And you certainly did not come here to sacrifice yourself for the sake of an illusory loyalty that exists solely in your own imagination. Carl Jung, the renowned thinker, once firmly asserted, "What you resist persists. Conversely, what you fully accept has the power to transform you." And today, for the individual, a moment of profound and powerful realization arrives. They owe no debt to anyone but themselves. They no longer wish to continue existing, torn by internal contradictions between what they truly feel and what they allow the outside world to see. Their soul has exhausted its strength, constantly bending and yielding in the name of love, and that accommodating, self-sacrificing, overly self-demanding image they carried has completed its mission and can now be left behind. For there is no longer a need to continue saving those who can only drag you down. There is no need to continue forgiving unforgivable actions to feel loved. There is absolutely no need to remain silent for someone else to feel comfortable and at ease. The only thing required of the individual at this moment is a firm commitment to themselves, to their inner truth, their peace of mind, and their integrity. And this significant commitment begins today. If these words resonate in your heart, then on this day you break the vicious cycle, ceasing to betray yourself for the sake of false love. This phrase is not just an ending, it is a powerful declaration of rebirth and renewal. And if everyone who reads this text dares to utter it, even if their voice trembles with uncertainty, even if they do not yet feel their full inner strength, they will take the most crucial first step towards their true liberation. Always remember this. What comes after liberation from everything that destroys the self is a vast and untouched space where the individual finally finds the opportunity to rebuild themselves based solely on their own truth and inner light.